Hello, this is Ann Jones, Webcast Manager at PRMIA, and I am pleased to welcome you to this PRMIA webinar. Today, Dr. Kimmo Soramak will present Financial Cartography. Dr. Kimmo Soramak is the founder and CEO of Financial Network Analytics. Before founding FNA in 2010, he worked for 15 years in policymaking, consulting, and multidisciplinary research at several central banks, including the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He has published in academic journals in the areas of economics, statistical mechanics, and operations research, and is a frequent speaker at industry and academic conferences. Kimmo holds a Doctor of Science in Technology and a Master of Science in Economics. Please feel free to submit your questions via the question pane on the right-hand side of your screen at any time during the presentation. Audience questions will be moderated by PRMIA's Training Director, Alex Voicu, and answered by Kimmo at the end of the session as time allows. Following this webinar, a link to the presentation will be emailed to you along with a link to the recording of today's webinar. So now, Kimmo, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks a lot, Anne, for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here talking about the topic financial cartography, which we'll soon learn what it's about. It's going to be probably around an hour, and in addition to some little math, we'll be mostly be looking at pictures. But let's start off with this quote from JeanClaude Trichet. He was the president of the European Central Bank and was president at the time of the financial crisis. This is from a speech he held in November 2010. When the crisis came, the serious limitations of existing economic and financial models immediately became apparent. As a policymaker during the crisis, I found the available models of limited help. In fact, I would go further. In the face of the crisis, we felt abandoned by conventional tools. So I think this is quite a strong statement from central bank chief, and but I think actually that many people at that time felt the same way, not only in regulation but also in the markets, that the world as we knew it, the tools that we had to understand it, and the lenses by which we looked at it had just become very different than they were before. And this is sort of what's been motivating me as a researcher and as an entrepreneur to provide some new views and new tools to perhaps fare better or understand it in a different way for the next crisis or in general for also non-crisis situations. But the thing is that I say that we were lost because we didn't have maps. And if we had had maps, which are not a new idea, we could have well, made better decisions. This is a map from almost 200 before Christ by a Greek mathematician, Eratosthenes. It's the first known map of the world and portrays the Mediterranean region pretty well. So Eratosthenes was Greek, from Cyrene, like I think that's current Egypt. So the Mediterranean region is quite well mapped. You can see Libya, where Africa is. You can see Asia. You can see Europe. So it's still imperfect. But what is remarkable about this map, and what was very important, is that it shows the latitude and the longitude system. So it shows the system by which he started measuring Earth. He measured also the circumference of Earth with a very high accuracy. I think it's about 3% error, what it's known to be today, 200 before Christ, and also already assumed that the world is round and not flat. So he set up this system for measuring Earth that then subsequent cartographers could use, and the maps that different people made over time could become comparable because there was a coordinate system. This is very important, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in the context of network theory. But before that, let's think about maps a little bit more. So what are they? Maps are all around us, so we really don't stop thinking so much what they are. So if you start thinking, they're just basically a set of points, lines, and areas defined both by position, with reference to a coordinate system, and by their non-spatial attributes, such as, okay, here is a city, this color denotes a country, and so forth. So what we're doing there in maps, we're encoding data as size, shape, value, texture or pattern, color and orientation of the points, lines and areas. Everything in a map has a meaning. So if you look at that map there, which shows the political map of Europe, you see that every pixel in that picture has a meaning. It's either land or ocean. The color denotes which country it belongs to, unlike perhaps like charts or usually how we look at perhaps financial data as charts, there are a lot of areas in those charts that don't have a meaning. In maps, everything has a meaning. So if we think about it a little bit more, in maps, the cartographer selects only the information that is essential to fulfill the purpose of the map. Like in the previous example, the purpose was to show political boundaries and the boundaries between land and ocean. Maps reduce multidimensional data into a two-dimensional space that is better understood by humans. The world is a three-dimensional space, and then we can map data onto different points of the earth. Like here is a city, here is a border. And so we're mapping multiple dimensions of data into a two-dimensional space, like we did in the previous map. On the right side, you see another map. It's from 1854. It shows it's a famous map by John Snow showing the clusters of cholera cases in the London epidemic. It's a map of London. It's in the Soho of London, and so there is Oxford Street at a little bit north and Regent Street a little bit west to that point. But what you see there are those bars that are displayed by the roadside. So there are a lot of, for example, cholera deaths just around this pump here. So what he did is he mapped geographical information and then cholera deaths related information and some infrastructure information like the location of the pumps, and clearly saw that most death cases are caused by something that is close to these pumps or perhaps this pump itself. And it turned out that it was in fact this water reservoir that was polluted and was causing the deaths. It's perhaps more remarkable because at that time the current theory for the spread of cholera or diseases like that was called miasma. So the idea that diseases spread because of bad air, and bad air is created by the deterioration of matter. So nothing related to bad water, for example. So this is perhaps the starting point of epidemiology. If you think of the Eratosthenes map being the starting point of geography. And both of these, geography and epidemiology, are sort of important now in the financial sense as well, because we're talking about this contagion, the spread of sort of like the spread of contagion, like the spread of viruses. So maybe there is something we can learn from here. So in short, maps are intelligence amplification. They aid in decision making and build intuition. By having the map, we're going to make different decisions than we would have done without the map. If we never had the map, we might not know that. We might think, okay, we know how to make decisions, but once you are exposed to the map with the map, you're just going to make better decisions. Think about going to a new city, and you can cope there without a map. You can find food and a hotel to stay in, but you're probably going to select a better hotel and a better restaurant when you have a map of the city. So the rest of the time we're going to focus on two types of maps. First, mapping systemic risk. That's more my background as a regulator or in the central banking area. And then about mapping financial markets, how we can visualize market data. So let's start talking about systemic risk first. So systemic risk is a term that is sometimes confused with systematic risk, but it is very different. Systemic risk was introduced into the perhaps common lexicon during the financial crisis, even though it's not only related to financial phenomena. You have at the top of the screen there the news articles mentioning systemic risk from Google Trends, and you see that before 2008 there wasn't really much mentioning, but during and after the financial crisis, this has been a topic that's been constantly in the news, especially so during 2009. So what is systemic risk? There are a lot of definitions for it, and how I understand it is that it's the risk that a system composed of many interacting parts fails due to a shock to some of its parts. So it's not only financial systems that have systemic risk. For example, the power outages in the power lines, it's also a systemic risk that the failure of one generator, for example, causes a cascades and causes a large-scale blackout. So it's more about dominoes and less so about a meteor strike that hits and affects everyone, and the system ceases to function as it was supposed to function. That's more the systematic risk notion. So in finance, it will be the risk that a disturbance in the financial system propagates and makes the system unable to perform its function, i.e., to allocate capital efficiently. And I would perhaps say that we're still in the phase that we're experiencing this systemic risk. The capital is probably not being allocated efficiently due to the government and other interventions and regulations that were put into the place as a consequence and through the financial crisis. So we're talking about domino effects, we're talking about cascading failures. These are different names for the same depending on which discipline you come from. Financial interlinkages, contagion, but anyhow it's some kind of process in the financial network. So what is the financial network and what is network theory? So I'm saying that network theory can be the financial maps, what cartography is to geographic maps. So it can provide us the coordinates that are needed in order to make the maps that we do about the financial system comparable and accurate. The main premise of network theory is that the structure of the links between the nodes matters. And to understand the behavior of one node, one must analyze the behavior of nodes that may be several links apart in the network, and these nodes would probably be, like in the simplest case, just financial institutions. Network theory is a field that is very interdisciplinary. It's been developed in different areas. They share the common methodology. Perhaps the first one to look at how the network nature matters to the performance of the system or affects the individuals was social network analysis, which is a branch of sociology. They started maybe in the 50s looking at how social networks function, how power and centrality of people affects how successful they are or how information spreads in social networks. And now, of course, lately with the Facebook and Twitter and social networking phenomena where a lot of data is becoming available about how these social networks look in reality, there's been a huge surge of research in this area. Another perhaps important area is the networks, what is called network science, that maybe comes more from the physics background. Statistical mechanics of physics looks at large-scale networks, looks at how the network structures that we observe, how could they come into being, and tries to, like in the physics tradition, tries to generate models and laws about why and how the systems that we see are as they are. There's a lot of relation to graph and matrix theory. Those are old fields. A network can always be represented as a matrix. There's from, to, that's a link. Each cell in the matrix can be a link. Biological network analysis or bioinformatics is a very thriving field. Where a lot of progress is being made understanding how molecules or cells or proteins interact with each other. And of course, we have computer science, which package routing, and other fields that are not here, where network theory is used to understand how the system works. And financial network analysis is also becoming, I think, slowly a field of its own. There's a lot of research being done, especially now after the financial crisis, trying to understand how the network nature, the interconnections, the interlinkages of the financial institutions affect their riskiness. There's also, on a practical level, the regulators are moving away from supervising individual banks only to have like a macroprudential supervision where they also take the bank's position into account in the network, how it's linked to other banks, in analyzing its riskiness, and are collecting and starting to get data about that from the banks as well. But how I actually see this more on an abstract level, the network aspect is just one unexplored dimension of data. If we think about just data, we can have one data point. Then we can have multiple observations of that data point. For example, humans and length. And then we can collect from those multiple people many variables, their length, their eating habits, their education level, and so forth. So then we have two dimensions. We have many observations, and we have many variables that we collect from each of those observations. Then we have the third dimension, which is time. So we can collect these over time and see how these change over time. And this is what is usually in, let's say, IT or this is a data cube. You have observations, you have variables, and you have time. So what the network here does is that it links these observations in some manner and says that these two people are colleagues, they have a link. These two people are friends, these two people are family members, they have a link. And being a colleague or a family member or a friend then affects perhaps your habits or other things that you want to explain about this phenomena. So it's one more dimension, it's the fourth dimension to the data. So let's go look at some empirical results. So here are some first maps of the financial system. This was some research I did at the New York Fed in 2004, and it's published a few years later. So on the left side we see a picture that shows the core of the FedWire interbank payment network. So FedWire is the system where banks transfer money to each other. Those money may be related to, or at that point were related to foreign exchange settlements, overnight loans, or federal funds markets, securities trades, large payments that are made by companies from one bank to another. So the system comprises about 8,000 banks. Any bank can send money to any other bank in the system. But if you look at the actual flows, who was sending money to whom, and how much, we found that there is a very dense core of 66 banks that comprise 75% of the value that was transferred in the system. The values are very high. They are about maybe 1.5 trillion US dollars back then every day. So the values are very large. There were 25 banks that formed a completely connected, so every one of those 25 banks sent money to every other bank or had a relationship with every other bank. And if you see that, so the width of the links scales with the total value of payments that was transferred between that pair of banks, and the banks are the nodes there. You see that there are maybe 4 or 5 banks that were much larger and much more important than the other banks in the system. So this is the type of data that this is the only data that was available perhaps before the crisis, and this type of data, in order to understand whether the bilateral links, exposures, flows between the banks is now being collected for regulatory purposes, but wasn't available back then. So we had to induce it from the payment flows. We found, and also other research found, that there are these banking networks or funds flow networks or lending networks between banks are very similar to other socio-technological networks. We have this very tight core. Some banks are hugely more important than others. There's similar, a few years earlier, by looking at the Austrian interbank market. There's an example on the right where you see some more hierarchical structure because some banks operate as central banks for other, like small savings or cooperative banks. But these were sort of the first views on how the actual relationships between the whole financial system were. And since then, there's been a lot of research by pretty much all central banks in the industrialized, and also now more and more every central bank has tapped into their interbank payment system data or data that they have on overnight loans. So here's an example of some research by Morten Beck at the New York Fed at that time. It shows the federal funds market. So this is the market where banks borrow and lend reserves, and these are settled as payments in the FedWire system. So they induced what loans were transacted in that system. It's different network layout there. So they put the most connected bank in the center. And then that bank connects to 165 banks, so it has a relationship with 165 banks, either borrowing or lending multiple times possibly during the day. So it's a very central bank in the system. And then banks in the first circle on the left top side, there are 271 banks that interact with banks in the first circle. And then on the third circle you have banks which interact with the other banks on the second circle and so forth. But from this layout you see that it's a very centralized system. There's one or perhaps few very important players who act as lenders and borrowers for the whole system. You can also see the evolution of the system over time on the right-hand side. You see that the peak network connectivity and the activity is reached around 4:35 p.m. and then slowly building up to that, and then getting lower towards the end of the day. It's a similar map from the Italian money market. It's just looking at different types of banks, small, large, or foreign banks. Same idea that the most central bank is put in the center. These never have names because the data is usually very confidential, so you don't see the names of the banks. They are only available to the central banks or the operators of these systems. Or more recently, there's been research at ETH, and there's actually more research on trying to identify which banks are systemically important or central. So there's a new measure that they've developed called depth rank, which tries to encapture the systemic importance. And on the left side, you see the banks in the that their depth rank. Their depth rank is higher, or the systemic importance is higher when they are closer to the center, and when they are redder. So from August 2007 to April 2008, on the left side, they were not that systemically important. And from the 2008 to 2010, this is based on public data, so the bank names are there. So you see that there are many banks became more important, and there are some banks that are much more important than the others. Another type of looking at the financial system. So where are we today in this, let's say, systemic risk analysis? So the regulatory response to recent financial crisis was to strengthen macroprudential supervision with mandates for more regulatory data pretty much to every regulator out there. That's a lot of data. We have, that is big data. It's complex data. Complex data usually refers to the fact that there are these network relationships, these interdependencies within the data. That's these trends of big data and complex data are providing tools for the regulators, because they are also being tackled elsewhere in the economy, tapping into Google's data that they collect, or Facebook. So there's a lot of progress in understanding large amounts of data and complex data, but it's at the same time also creating challenges to understand and utilize and operationalize that data that is being collected. The financial networks, the systemic risk is getting their own literature and metrics that are different from other fields of network theory who have spent time longer on identifying central or systemically important or important nodes and looking at flows than the financial literature has so far. I'm just going to show a little example that I've been working together with the Norwegian Central Bank. It's an oversight monitor. It taps into the interbank payment data, which is data on individual transactions by each bank in their economy. So the monitor here allows the identification of systemically important banks and the evaluation of the impact of bank failures on the interbank payment system. We tested that these are interactive visualizations. They are available on the link below. I'll show that address also later. But they seem to work pretty good also via the this system of a webinar. So here, this is just artificial data. So this is not real data, but in order to just showcase the ideas. So plotted, basically this would be created from, or is created from payment data, interbank payments. We can see each bank here. The bank names are actually fictional US counties from different literature. And it's just bank name appended to the end. So we see each bank here, and we see the flows that of payments from each bank to other bank via these arrows, and they are thicker when there are higher flows, and thinner where there are less amount of flows. These are interactive. We can play around with them. In this picture, this is about the liquidity position of the banks. So what we've done is the node height shows the available liquidity to the banks, and the node width, the required liquidity. So if they have very narrow width and very high, they are in good shape, and if they would be very flat, they are in bad shape. So it's easy to quickly identify if there are banks and important banks that would be not in a good shape on a given day, or might cause risks if they had some operational issues, for example. These are time series, so we can see how the system evolves over time. Here is like a week, and this provides like a real-time monitor to understanding and monitoring the whole financial system, depending on the data that is available. So that's an example. You can also map different amounts of different other properties to the nodes. You can see like how much of the funds were transferred by 10 a.m. So bigger nodes would have transferred more, and smaller nodes less. Also, the color here shows the end of day position. If it's black, they are net receivers of funds, and if they are red, they are net payers. It provides sort of like a just different way of in a compact way, looking at a lot of information and possibly then making connections that you would not be able to make by looking at statistics alone. Good. So I have a polling question here before we go into the next topic. So which types of networks are, or do you think are most important for financial institutions and regulators? First, if we think of exposure or contagion networks, so those would be networks where banks lend each other and have some kind of an exposure, or the trade and payment flow networks, looking at how things move or how funds or payments or trades move in the network. Or we could look at supply chain networks of banks' clients, or we could look at social networks and how they affect the bank's performance, for example, and how their directors are connected, or how the business relationships are connected to each other.
I have launched the poll question. You have 10 seconds to answer, or approximately 10 seconds. I have closed the poll questions. I'll share the results now. We had 81% said 1, 13% said 2, 6% said 3, and 4% said 0. I mean, sorry, number 4 said 0%.
Okay, now that's interesting. In the projects that I've done, and we did start with exactly exposure and contagion networks. They are very intuitive. like are the trade and payment flow networks. I think there's also questions where social networks can provide some added value, for example, investment decisions, and there are also questions where supply chain networks, like we had 6%, are interesting from a business perspective, finding, for example, areas where business could be extended, or trying to figure out how disruption in one company that spreads out via the supply chains to others for credit decisions. Very good. So let's move on to the second topic, which was about mapping financial markets. And what we'll do there is look at 4 different visualizations based on the same asset price data. And the purpose of these maps that we develop are to identify price-driving themes and market dynamics in general. To reduce complexity, we'll be looking at correlation networks and the mapping also return and variance risk information onto them. So we have a lot of data, and we want to provide something that reduces the amount of data, but tries to contain the signal from the noise. Spot anomalies. When you do visualizations, you often are able to spot anomalies much more easily than when you do statistical analysis. And in general, to build intuition. When you look at these maps or visualizations regularly, and you are aware of the market, intuition is a domain-specific skill. So if you know the data and it's presented to you in a good manner, you can quickly spot things about it and quickly spot things that are wrong about it when you're used to seeing it in a certain way. So we'll look at 4 different types of visualizations. Heat maps first. Those are quite traditional visualizations of correlations. We'll be looking at trees, which are a little bit newer, at least in practice, and networks and Salmon projections, which I don't think I've seen other people present them. So we're going to look at them as well. So these are based, well, the ones I show are based on correlations, but they could also be based on tail dependence or other measures of dependence if we wanted them to be. And I'll talk about that a little bit in one of the last slides. So I'm going to showcase these methods for the period around the collapse of Lehman Brothers. So I think most people here in this audience know about the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Just a few bullet points. So this was a large investment bank, 26,000 employees. It had large amount of assets, so it was a large failure. The collapse was due to losses in the subprime holdings and inability to find funding due to extreme market conditions, to put it in one way. Anyhow, it was seen as a divisive point in the 2007-2009 financial crisis. So we'll look what the data tells us about what happened during this time. So we have prices. We're calculating the returns from those prices, and we're looking how these log returns are correlated between 118 global assets in 4 asset classes. So this is a cross-asset class example. The asset classes that we have are the assets we have in this data are stock exchange indices like the Dow Jones Index or the DAX in Germany. We have foreign exchange rates, euro, US dollar, other exchange rates. We have government bonds like Irish 10-year bond, and we have corporate bonds like the EMU corporate, like AAA for 1 to 3 years, an example. So on the left side you see the first visualization, which is just putting the numbers in a matrix of correlations. Each row and each column shows the pairwise correlation between the 2 assets. These are symmetric, so we could only just visualize the other triangle, of course. But so we have these correlation matrices. That's the point here. And then we want to somehow visualize them a little bit better. So the first simple way, of course, is to color the cells of that correlation matrix, saying that if the correlation is very negative, we color them with deep blue, And if the correlation between these two assets is very positive, we color it with red. And I don't have the asset names here because there are so many rows, so we have 118 rows here. But you can clearly see the asset class differences actually in this heat map. So first the corporate bonds on the top up until the FX rates start to have negative correlations with the bonds. Then we have the government bond yields, which are mostly positive with the corporate bonds, and then the stock exchange indices, which are mostly negative with the corporate and corporate bonds. So this is for the time period between January, well, for 1 month in January 2007. And there you see like the stock exchange indices have partly positive on the bottom right corners. You can see how the stock exchange indices are correlated with each other. So partly positive, partly negative. We have regions of positive and negative correlations there. So this is one way to visualize this data, and you can actually already see quite a lot from it. Let's look at the same heat maps for the period of the Lehman collapse. So we have T-2, that's 2 months before the collapse. T-1 is 1 month before the collapse, and T+1 and T+2 are 1 and 2 months after the collapse of Lehman Brothers. We already see maybe some just points all around the Lehman collapse. We see that the stocks are much more correlated with each other. They are much redder, especially on the 1 month after the collapse. They also correlate positively with the bonds, which has changed from January 2007. In the T+2, there are actually, you don't see any of those regimes so clearly anymore as you saw in that January 2007 area. So this is a way to look at pretty much all of the data, all of the correlations, but in this visualization we cannot really map other information because we're keeping all the correlation information. We have almost 7,000 different colored cells there that give us an overview of what is happening, but doesn't allow us to look into more detail on the single assets. So what I'm going to show next is asset trees. So these were originally proposed by Rosario Mantegna in 1999. So he's considered one of the fathers of econophysics. These are currently already used by some major financial institutions for market analysis and portfolio optimization and visualization on trying to understand about how the markets move. So the methodology here in a nutshell is that, okay, we calculate the returns, we calculate the correlations, how do they move together, these assets. Then we convert this correlation into distances. We say that something is very close to each other if they move very similarly, if the correlation is very high, and something is very far away from each other if the correlation is very low. And then we extract what is called the minimum spanning tree from this network, and then we visualize that minimum spanning tree. And I'll just go through that in steps. So the minimum spanning tree is of a graph, because we had the correlation matrix. We can turn that into a network, saying that each node is an asset and each link is a correlation. And then we say that the value of this correlation is actually distance. So things that have a higher correlation are closer to each other. They have a closer distance in the graph. So the spanning tree of a graph is a subgraph, but it's technically is a tree and connects all nodes together. But if you look at the example below, you can think of that these nodes are cities, and then what roads would you build in order to connect all these cities together with least amount of cement? And that would be the minimum spanning tree. So you can see there would be a lot of options to connect those cities to each other, but the one configuration that is shown there in darker black is the one where the distances between all of the cities, the whole system is minimized. And that's the spanning tree of that graph. And we're identifying the spanning tree, minimum spanning tree of this correlation matrix. So this is how it looks like. Now we have each node again as an asset. The color of the nodes denotes the asset class. So we have the yellow, the equity indices like the Dow Jones and DAX and others. The purple ones are currency exchange rates, and the blue and green ones are corporate and government bonds. But we're also mapping into this visualization the size of the node, which reflects now volatility, the variance of the returns. So we see like which assets had a higher variance, and then the correlation information is mapped as the distance between the nodes. If they are very close together, they are highly correlated. If they're very far apart, their correlation is low. So we, for example, see that those government bonds and the corporate bonds are very correlated at the bottom of that visualization. So they have very high correlations with each other. The equities are a little bit spread out here and correlate sometimes mostly in their own cluster, but sometimes also with the bonds or the FX rates. So, for example, there's the Dow Jones, there's Irish 10-year government bonds, which I mentioned earlier as an example, and the corporate bonds are just all clustered there together. There's the euro-US dollar exchange rate there. So this is the backbone correlations, the strongest correlations, and by connecting them with the strongest correlations, we sort of see also the hierarchical structure of that correlation matrix, because the minimum spanning tree identifies the hierarchical structure of the correlation matrix. So we can again look at the same data from this link. So you can also use this as a public link, so you can also just go there and use it from your own computer. But here we see the visualization of the Lehman collapse starting from 16th of July 2008 and going one day at a time, looking at 1 month correlations and returns and variance of the returns, and putting them in this time series visualization. So you see that there's quite some movement there because the correlations change a little bit and the structure changes a little bit. But once you get accustomed to that, you notice that the base structure of the market, and we're covering pretty much we have 4 asset classes across a lot of regions, so global markets and like a bird's eye view to how the markets are moving. Sometimes the tree shrinks, so the correlations get stronger across the board, and sometimes it relaxes. And once we get closer to the Lehman collapse, we see that it really shrinks, and all the asset classes become much more correlated with each other. And it's sort of the story of the correlations going to one in the crisis. So we can jump into that. You can watch the whole thing separately. We can jump to this approximately the time of the Lehman collapse, and you see that the variance of the returns is very high in across pretty much all asset classes except the bonds here, which are a little bit less correlated than they were before. There's some really high Swiss government bond yields here. Russian Traded Federation Index, DAX, everything is highly correlated. You can go again here and see these, what are they in more detail in order to look at what the assets are. You can map labels and other data. Now we had the variance and the deviation of the node size, and the correlations here as the distance between the nodes. And when we go here to the end of the time period, we see that the correlations are already relaxing a bit from the peak of the crisis. So we have these longer distances. The bonds are spreading out, especially a lot compared to the beginning of the less correlated than they were before. They become different. Very good. So what we are doing here is pretty much we were filtering out a lot of correlations in the previous, just identifying one correlation out of 117 that each of the asset has, and mapping that into the picture. So we were discarding 116 correlations, just keeping one. So we might say, okay, that's a little bit too much. So there are lots of other methodologies that try to keep more correlations in a meaningful manner. You can only look at significant correlations, so you can do different statistical procedures to make sure that the sample that you are having really is a correlation and not just random variance or noise. There are graph theoretic methodologies, so I'm saying that, okay, I'm going to look at more links, like these PMFGs partial correlation networks. These PMFGs are planar maximally filtered graphs. Partial correlation network saying that I want to control for all the other correlations and for the market. I want to look at direct dependence and not correlation. You can try to infer the direction to causality in these networks by looking at what I call influence networks or Granger causality, different statistical methods to try to extract more information from this correlation data. I want to just show here next is a new methodology that's being developed by Barigozzi and Brownlees. Brownlees is from Pompeu Fabra, Universitat Pompeu Fabra, who I've also worked together with them on these issues. What this does is it tries to identify and control for the other assets' impact on dependence on the market. Try to control for a lot of factors and infer from the data what are the real links between the statistically significant and real links between the assets. You see that it creates sort of a similar picture, a little bit more information stored there within the who is linked to whom, perhaps a little more room for exploration and a bit more accurate than the minimum spanning tree approach. It also captures both the contemporaneous and serial dependence, so lead lag effects and what is the contemporaneous correlation. The final example is what is called Salmon's projection. This was proposed by John Salmon in '69, and it's technically a non-linear projection method to map a high-dimensional space onto a space of lower dimensionality. It's better explained by this example, where we have three different types of flowers: Iris sedosa, Iris versicolor, and Iris virginica. And we have measured four things, so that's the four-dimensional space we're having here. Four things about them: so the sepal length, width, the petal length, and the petal width. And what we're doing here is we're mapping this four-dimensional space into a two-dimensional space. And in this two-dimensional space, we're just looking at difference. If these four values are very different for two observations of these flowers, we put them far apart. And if they're very similar, we put them close to each other. And when we do this, this algorithm, we see the result on the right. So the different observations that we have from the different flowers, they cluster together. So the blue ones, without knowing what kind of species it was, they cluster together because they are just very similar with each other and different from the other flowers. And the two other flowers, the versicolor and virginica, they a little bit overlap, but they are still more similar to each other than they are similar from each other or different from each other. So what we do in the next visualization, we do the same thing for the assets, and instead of saying that these are species of flowers, or we're saying that, okay, let's see how this same algorithm would map our different asset class assets. Would it cluster them together, or on the basis of similarity of correlation profiles? So the multidimensionality there is that each asset has 117 correlations with each other asset, and we are looking at how similar each one of those profiles are from each other. So we end up with pictures like this. So the color here denotes again the asset class, like the species in the previous picture. The size of the node reflects volatility, like in the trees, or the variance of the returns. And the distance between the nodes, now we don't have any links here. reflects the similarity of the correlation profile. So if they're close, we have very similar asset. If they're on top of each other, that's the same asset. If they're far apart, where they're very different, their price movements are very different from each other. And yeah, this gives us a mapping of the dependence of assets among each other and their characteristics. So we can take a look at the interactive version again. So we have the same time period, same data. We do see them cluster, the FX rates cluster pretty with each other. The bonds are there in the northeast corner. Actually, in these visualizations, it doesn't matter what direction they are. So you could rotate it, and it would just keep its the meaning. The side, the northwest, don't have any meaning here. Just the relative distances between the nodes matters. What we see here is the same as we see in the asset trees, that over time period the assets start more clustered together, the correlation gets stronger, they get more similar, while at the same time their volatility of the returns increases. So we can again jump just to that approximately to the Lehman collapse period, where we see that equities here are on the right side altogether, the bonds are a little bit more spread out, the size of the nodes is higher, the variances are higher, and the FX rates are here, and bonds a little bit more spread out. And when we go to the end, it starts to get more mixed again. So we see this clustering and contracting phase around the Lehman collapse. Okay, so we had the same nodes there in different places now. Yeah, as I mentioned, so we can do the same thing for tail dependence. Correlation is a linear measure of like normal circumstances. We could look at how the extreme movements, whether the extreme movements are coordinated or uncoordinated, and we could use the same visualizations to uncover which nodes or which assets have the same extreme movements as we estimate them, and which assets are similar in regarding to their extreme movements, which might be important for portfolio selection, for example. So I have another polling question here before we wrap up. So where do you think can financial data visualization provide most value? Data validation and exploration phase, when you're learning and trying to understand what data means. Enhancing intuition, so that you have a mental model of the data in your head which corresponds to the visualization. As an add-on to statistical analysis, so you get more information, something that you might miss because statistical analysis, well, it's mostly on aggregates, and it's easier to spot perhaps outliers by visual means. Or in risk management, like the pictures that we looked at now, trying to understand how the correlations, how assets move together, or for trading, maybe spotting trading opportunities from these pictures.
I have launched the poll question. You have approximately 10 seconds to answer. I have closed the poll question. I will share your results. 29% said 1, 29% said 2, 7% said 3, 36% said 4, and 0% said 5.
Very good. That was more spread out. So risk management, which was also mainly the topic on the visualizations that we looked at today, was the winner here. Data validation, exploration, enhancing intuition, add-on statistical analysis. Yeah, it's very interesting results there. So risk management, validation, and enhancing intuition were the leaders here. Good. So I'll just wrap up this seminar. We're about our hour. So this is from the same speech by JeanClaude Trichet, as where I started the presentation. In the absence of clear guidance from existing analytical frameworks, policymakers had to place particular reliance on our experience. Judgment and experience inevitably played a key role. So I think this is the same as a little bit the same result as from that intuition, experience, gaining a better understanding. So it was important when the models didn't work as expected. Good. So if you're interested in this topic more, so there's plenty of material on our website. I'm running a research blog there as well, so I'm featuring some of my own research by others. Currently there are a lot of tutorials on the software that was used to create all these visualizations, which you can use free there on the website as well. Upload your own data if you like. Just need to register. If you have any questions, please send me an email, follow me on Twitter. I'm happy to discuss. There's also going to be a live course that I'm holding on April 26th in New York. So we'll be going through the same topics as today in more depth. How financial networks, what are the lessons for risk management? So if you're interested in that, there will be there's a link from the slides to the more information about that. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kimmo, for this refreshing dimension of financial markets. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and but there's always room for progress. It feels like we're coming a little bit out of the dark ages here. Where are we in the financial mapping process? Are we at the map that you shown earlier by Eratosthenes, or are we at the map that we all had in school on the wall? Are we at the Google Maps stage?
I think we're closer to that map of the Eratosthenes. It's a very new field. I think the most progress is made currently in bioinformatics. But the mapping of the financial system, I think it's very much still in the early phases. Of course, our technologies are much better than Eratosthenes. They are accurate in their own domain, perhaps, but we are missing a lot of continents, and that we perhaps don't have data on, haven't collected data, haven't thought about looking at like before the financial crisis. We didn't think about looking at those interconnections. Now we do, but probably there are still areas that we learn later that we need to be looking at. But it's a gradual process, and needs to be. You need to have good foundations, and you become better over time. And I think it's a collaborative effort as well. And there's researchers, practitioners, regulators who are interested in this and improving the maps that we have over time.
Yeah, you mentioned that there are many unexplored continents. What are some of the data issues that you've encountered in your research?
Well, the biggest issue is always the confidentiality of the data. So, for example, the first half of the presentation, that was all based on data that possibly only a couple of people have access to. So they are not even available to perhaps the relevant divisions in the central banks. Or the regulators, because of agreements that have been done with the banks not to disclose that information further than where it is, where the data is stored. So the access to the data is a big issue, especially for researchers in academia. They don't have access to any of this regulatory real data of the financial systems and the interconnections of the banks. I think there hasn't probably been in general enough also effort on making the quality of the data good. most of the time when we do projects, a lot of the time is spent on cleaning the data. And especially when you have these visualizations, you so easily spot the errors in the data that you would not spot if you would just do statistical analysis. They would be hidden there. The results might be incorrect and because of the underlying bad quality of the data, but you would not spot them. When you do visual analysis of the same data, you will spot those errors much more easily, so then you will end up spending much more time also cleaning the data.
Right. These look like very great tools of looking at data exposed. Have you found any predictive ability for financial network mapping in your studies?
I know a lot of people who are working on those. The thing is that if I would find some predictive capabilities, I would perhaps use them and not disclose them. We are trying to look at how this, like, just from a mathematical perspective, how to make forecasts from these correlations. So we have a time series of networks. What would be our best guess of the next network? Like if you think of a regression line, but doing that on a more complicated data on this network, so we regress the next network. But we haven't finished that work yet.
That's very interesting. If we go back to slide 24, I think there might be some predictive ingredients in there. There are some interesting things we see there. Like you see the correlation breakdown as you progress towards the Lehman T0 moment. And maybe you can give us a little bit more background on the data used here. Like what are the time windows and
so these are monthly. So we have about 20 observations for each correlation. So that means that it is very low amount of. Well, we have two problems here. We have the problem of these just map the correlations as they were calculated. There are two problems there. One is that many of those correlations, because we only have 1 month of data, are probably not significant, but they're anyhow mapped there because we didn't want to have so many empty cells there. And the other one is that we're making a lot of comparisons here, so we would need to, so because of that we're making 6,000 estimates, so some of those estimates are bound to be incorrect as well. So there's, and that's, yeah, things you need to take into account when you do this in the real practical case. What is your, like? Are you more interested in avoiding false positives, so seeing correlations where they aren't, or are you okay of having some correlation there even if it might not be there? So there are some methodological issues here, but still, I think you can still, even if you have a lot of error in this picture, perhaps because of the monthly intervals, I think there's still a lot of information left there. But that was, I think, the point that I was also perhaps doing is that this is a good starting point, but then like these other methodologies perhaps give us less noise and more signal than the heat maps.
Mm-hmm. No, but the heat maps raise some very good red flags there.
Yeah.
Can you please outline a bit of difference between the asset trees methodology and the Salmon methodology? What are different questions that they answer?
Yes. So here in asset trees, we are looking at pairwise correlations. The link is about the pairwise correlation, and we're putting nodes together, connect them with a link if they have a very strong correlation with each other. So we cannot really say that, let's say we have, in this picture we have this a little bit larger node on the left side, the equity, and we have another equity there on the top side. We know that they are connected via, well, they seem to be very far apart, but that farness doesn't really contain any accurate information. While in the Salmon projection, the closeness and farness of nodes contains all the information. So we try to lay them out so that they're like, it's about similarity of the assets rather than the similarity of a correlation with some particular other assets. So we're comparing the pairwise correlations and the whole correlation profile of the nodes. Did that make sense?
Very much so. What's the computational sophistication in network analysis? Are you facing any hardware barriers, or is it a more incipient stage where?
I think the biggest obstacle or the biggest hardware challenge is the number of pixels that you have on the screen. Because when you get a lot of nodes, you can calculate a lot of things. You can calculate the layouts even, like of these networks as very large number of. We could have thousands of or tens of thousands of nodes here, but they would not. You would need to have a lot of pixels in your monitor in order to display that information, because there's only a certain amount of information that can be displayed on the finite amount of pixels on the monitor. So the visualizations you can only usually do for smaller networks, and if you have larger networks, then you need to cluster things together, saying that instead of putting all the nodes here that are the government bonds and the corporate bonds, we would put one node there that saying that this is a cluster of bonds here, and this is a cluster of equities of certain characteristic. So then the challenge would be to display less information that could be communicated via the visual means. But usually the hardware problems, we haven't encountered any other like computational issues that would prevent us from calculating anything.
So you need to convince the New York Fed to take over Times Square, and then you can have a financial visualization symposium.
Yeah, you need to have a big screen for that.
Well, you've got plenty of them in Times Square.
Yeah. But actually, the other way is to, if you think about Google Maps, how it works is that you take a look at the country, you see certain amount of information, then you zoom in, you start getting more information, more granular information about it. So I think that would be the way to also work with these, is that you could start with a bird's eye view, and then when you zoom in, you start to get more information about well, which assets they are. So the nodes, you could start seeing the nodes, you could start seeing their other properties that they have, and in the beginning it would be just like an outlay of clusters. Here are maybe equities, here are bonds, and here are FX rates.
That makes sense. Are you when using heat maps, for example, are you looking at an approach of mapping the time structure of correlations as well, or?
Yeah, we also have those. So they it's the same animations like we had for the trees. So you can see like how the colors evolve over time. The thing is that colors are not very accurate, and people see them differently. And depending what the neighboring color is, you see the neighboring color differently. So they are not very accurate means of communicating information. They're better for communicating information like categorical information, like we have here for the asset classes. Because we only have 4, we can only remember a couple of colors, and then it depends also which color is next to which color. So what is the shade that it looks like? So it's like with these gradients, it's a bit dangerous. You might make conclusions that are not the case just because neighboring colors are different from that cell.
Yeah. The Financial Stability Board is, as you know, publishing annually a list of banks in different buckets that they need to have additional loss absorbency cushions or buffers. Is that list in accordance to your maps, or are there any divergences from their publications?
I haven't done this in practice, but I have worked on theory about how to identify systemically important banks from different exposure data sets, and I'm working with some regulators on looking at the actual exposure data, but not on that particular case. Quite often I think like this in order to, well, you have lots of different models, network theoretical models that can be applied in identifying the important banks in terms of their position in a network, usually relate to the same type of algorithms that are, for example, used by Google to rank web pages. That is the PageRank algorithm. So you look at banks who are connected to other important banks, and they are important because they are connected to other important banks. So these types of, they're called eigenvector centrality measures, I think are very good for identifying the network aspect of the importance of the banks.
Right, the eigenvectors, every graduate student's a nightmare.
Yes. Well, the PageRank is easier. It's easier at least. People have an intuitive feeling how pages are more important when they have more incoming links from other pages. And then when you iterate it over the system, pages are important because they have incoming links from other important pages, which are important because they have important links from other incoming pages, and so forth. Just a little bit of math to calculate it.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your presence today and for adding this very new interesting dimension to financial markets.
Thanks. It's my pleasure.
Most interesting.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you, Kimmo, for sharing your expertise, and thanks to all who have joined us today. Please go to PRMIA's website at www.prmia.org to find more upcoming thought leadership webinars and information on joining PRMIA as a sustaining member to gain unlimited access to our weekly webinars. Thank you for attending this PRMIA webinar.